In the Bible, we find these stories of men and women doing great and marvelous things, especially throughout the Old Testament as well as the New. The Bible is just filled with these characters who are doing these great things. You have Moses, who is maybe the greatest leader of the Old Testament, leading these people out of Egypt into the wilderness and eventually into Canaan. You have Esther, who's not really called to be a queen, but she doesn't think she's queen material, but she decides to do it anyway to save her people. And there's Elijah, and there's Jeremiah, and there's David and Ruth, and you have all these people who are doing these great and marvelous things. And the question that sometimes we need to ask ourselves when we're studying or reading about these people is, what makes them great? What makes them great? They have different circumstances, they have different abilities, different talents, yet, and sometimes different outcomes in their lives, yet they are typically successful. In fact, in the book of Hebrews chapter 11, that faith chapter of the Faith Hall of Fame, Paul, who I think is the writer there, and he talks about how there are different people who had great faith. And different things happen to them, yet they all have faith. And he talks about how Joseph, by faith, went into Egypt. And he tells us that Moses, by faith, he left Egypt. By faith, many died, and by faith, many lived. And so he kind of asks this question is, well, if that's true, then what is faith? Does faith cause us to live? Does faith cause us to die? Does faith cause us to go somewhere? Does faith cause us to stay at home? What does faith cause us to do? And he asks this question, and what you realize is that what made these men and women great wasn't their abilities, it wasn't their circumstances that they were placed in, but it was their faith. And faith was what made them great, focusing on Jesus. And when we come to Matthew chapter 11, which is where we're going to spend most of all of our time this morning. Matthew chapter 11 and verse 28 to 30. This is a passage that has been read over and over again. Typically, it's read on Sabbath morning, or if you're used to being read on Sunday morning, you might hear it read quite often as a place when people come to church and maybe they've had a rough week, maybe the roof has been caving in, maybe they've spent too much time in Oklahoma City, whatever it may be, maybe it's too much time at camp meeting. This is one of the verses they read. Matthew chapter 11 and verse 28. This is the words of Jesus. Jesus says to his disciples and to many others, he says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And often we hear, yes, come. We'll hear the preacher, we'll hear an elder, we'll hear someone at church say, "Come to Jesus, and He will give you rest." Are you burdened? Are you working hard? Come to Jesus. Jesus is here at church, and He will give you rest. And often this passage is, I think, very, very misunderstood of what Jesus is meaning by the term rest. Because often we read this and we think that Jesus is our problems are going to go away. But Jesus is actually asking us, this is an invitation that Jesus is giving to us, not just simply to rest, but also to work. And it's a term I'd like to use as restful labor. Because the rest of this passage, verse 29 and verse 30, actually is an invitation to work, is it not? It says, take, verse 29, verse 28, Jesus says, "I'm going to give you rest." But then the next verse he says, "Take my yoke upon you." So what is he saying? Is he saying that we're going to have a restful time where there's time to work, or is it a little bit of both? What is how can you rest and work at the same time? What is Jesus talking about here? Well, we're going to go into this. We're going to go we're going to try and go as deep as we can this morning, because there's a lot of good information here that I think is going to be a blessing to you. It's been a blessing to me. Let's start at verse 28. Jesus says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Come to me, Jesus says. All who labor and are heavy laden. This is an invitation and an appeal. And the first question is, who is Jesus talking to? Who is Jesus appealing to? What invitation is this sent to? And it tells us right away. It says, those who what? You know it, right? Those who?
Are heavy laden.
Those who labor, right? Those who are working hard. Those who are working. Jesus says, are you working? Those who are in labor, who are working. But it also says, and are heavy laden or heavy burdened. The picture that Jesus is trying to paint is these are people who are working hard, but they're also struggling. How many of you are working hard, but you're struggling at the same time? It's this picture of a man who has these 2 buckets of water on his shoulders. You've seen that picture before. And he's working hard to carry this, but the weight is too much for him. And so he's trying to carry this weight. He's taking it from his home. He's going to his destination. And as he's making his way, carrying this weight on his shoulders, you can see him tipping, and the water is spilling out on both sides. And he's making his way, and he's having a hard time doing it. He's carrying a heavy weight on his shoulders, and he's working really hard to do it. He's working really hard to carry this burden, but you can tell just by looking at him that he is struggling to carry it. It's like the woman running up the hill. She's working really hard. She might not be totally fit for the job to run up this hill, but she wants to run. She knows that there's a goal ahead of her, and she's running, trying to get up, but she's struggling to get up the hill. Jesus says, come to me if you are working. You're working really, really hard, yet you're struggling. Come to me. And he says, I'm going to take away your weight. Is that what he says? He says, come to me, and I'm going to relieve you of your stress. After camp meeting, we spent a day or two over at Ash's parents' house over in Amity, Arkansas. And while we were there, her dad is a workaholic. He just loves to work and work and work, which is a good thing some of the time. And it is amazing what this man can do. Not as far as work, but as far as when he gets home. When this man gets home for lunch, he'll eat lunch with us, and then I saw this picture. What happened is that he got into his recliner chair, and we were talking, and we were having a good time, and he fell asleep in 5 seconds. And he just out, and then he snores for maybe a couple of minutes. And then after he had done snoring for, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, he gets up, he wakes up instantly. It's not you don't hear any of him rubbing his eyes. He just gets up, gets out of his chair, puts his shoes on, and gets in the car. And within a minute's time from him waking up to him it was about a minute's time from him waking up to getting in the car, he was off to work again. All he needed was a little cat nap, and he was off back to work. Now, some of you can do that. I don't think I could do that. When I fall asleep, it's over. There's no more getting up. It better be about a 5-hour time, and within that time I'm going to get up. And so, but this isn't a new thing. This is something that he's always done. Is after lunch every day, he takes a little cat nap for about 5 minutes or so, and he's off to work. Jesus says, "Come to me, and all those who are working, who labor, who are heavy laden, you're struggling." He says, "I'm going to give you rest." He doesn't say, "I'm going to give you all these things." And when you look at the word rest here, it's not a long sleep. It's more of a nap. In fact, we ask the question, why do we rest? We rest to recollect our energy, to recollect strength, right? In fact, the Greek word that is used here is anapao. Can you say that? Anapao?
Anapao.
Anapao, and it means to rest, or to be restored, to be relaxed, to recollect your strength. And it means to cause or permit one to cease from any movement or labor in order to recover and collect his strength. So what Jesus tells us is if you come to me, I'm going to give you an opportunity to rest from your labor, from your struggling, so that you can recollect your strength and continue on. Now, why does Jesus say that? Why doesn't just Jesus take away our problem, take away our stress, take away our issue? Would have been so much easier, right? How many times have you been struggling with a family problem, a marriage problem? How many times have you been struggling with your kids? I mean, with finances, with different things in your life, maybe your work life, maybe you're struggling with this coworker who's just really messing with your emotions, and you just don't really want to do something against them, and you say, Lord, please take this person away. Please fix this problem. And the problem isn't fixed, right? Most of the time the problem isn't fixed. But most of the time what God does is He gives us an opportunity to recollect our strength so that we may go and attack this problem or go and approach this issue. Jesus doesn't take it away because He knows that when we work at it together, you begin to grow. Jesus, in verse 28, tells us to come to Him, not that He's going to take our problems away, but that He's going to give us an opportunity to recover, to rest, so that we may once again go against this problem, this burden. But if we were struggling alone, if we were already struggling carrying this burden, carrying this problem, carrying this issue, whatever it may be, there's a part of us that knows that once we've recovered, once we've taken this nap, once we have our strength back, that we're still not going to be able to accomplish this problem alone. And in verse 29, Jesus doesn't leave us hanging. He doesn't leave us alone. He says in verse 29, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Jesus, it's very interesting here that Jesus doesn't say, take your yoke. He doesn't say, give me your yoke. Hey, let's put your yoke on. But He says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart. Because what begins to happen is Jesus cares deeply about you. In fact, Jesus told Peter, remember when right before the cross, Jesus told Peter, and He said, Peter, I have prayed for you because Satan has wanted to sift you as I am praying for your faith. Jesus takes an interest in us. He prays for us. He even prays to His own Father for us. And if Jesus cares for us, what begins to happen is that the issues, the concerns, the wants, the desires of our heart can sometimes become the issues of His heart. And so He says, take my yoke upon you, and His yoke becomes the same thing as our yoke, because He cares deeply about His children. And so we put on the same yoke, which we thought was just ours, but in fact He had taken that same yoke before. Jesus says, I've taken this yoke, I've marched this path on the farmyard, I've done this, I've ran this race before, I've been exactly where you have, and you'll notice that my yoke is a little bit more worn out than yours. You'll notice that the place where you're going to be is a little more worn out. It's not a fresh new yoke, but it's an old one, because I've been here before, and I've marched this path before. I've been with this temptation before. I've been where you are right now before, and I know how to get to the end. And Jesus says, take this yoke upon you and learn from me. Because when you're working together with someone who's more experienced, you get to learn a little bit. And Jesus says, learn from me and notice that I am gentle. I'm not going to go too fast for you. I'm not going to drive you too hard, because I'm gentle and humble or lowly in heart. He's like the woman who comes back for the other runner. And He says, I've been where I've crossed this hill, I've crossed this mountain, I've crossed this slope before. I know how hard it is to get past this obstacle, and I'm going to run at your pace and show you how to do it. Jesus says, come to me, all who are struggling, and I'm going to give you rest. But when you take my yoke upon you, which is very similar to yours, we're able to overcome this. Verse 29 continues to say, and you will find rest for your souls. Not for your body anymore, but this is rest for your souls. And the Greek word here is psyche, and it's kind of this idea of your mind and personality. And but Jesus is making a transition here from just rest to rest for your soul and your spiritual soul as well. Because a lot of times our personal, emotional, and physical issues are tied to a spiritual issue that is underlying everything as well. And Jesus says, if you come with me, come to me, you're going to find rest, to regather strength. And together we're going to work at this thing together. And when we're working together, you're going to find rest, not in the rest that you're falling asleep, but rest in the idea of peace. And then I love what it says at the end in verse 30. It says in verse 30, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And the question comes, why is his yoke easy? Why is his burden light? And it's easy and it's light because there's two spots. There's two spots open. One for him and one for you. It's easy and it's light is because you were never meant to carry this yoke alone. Most yokes have two spots, right? It's very rare that you'll find a yoke for just one. They do make them, but most yokes have two spots, two locations. And Jesus is in this short little message that he gives to those he was speaking to, is he's also saying that you were never meant to carry your yoke or your burden alone. You weren't built for it. That's why you're struggling to do it. That's why you're a little lopsided when you're carrying this yoke, this burden that you have, is because you were never meant to carry it alone. And so I don't know what your burden is this morning. I don't know what is causing you to tumble, causing you to struggle and stumble this past week. But Jesus tells us that you weren't meant to carry it alone. In fact, there's a little saying that is quite beautiful. That the more we rest in Jesus, the more that we are abiding in Jesus, the more that we are focused and doing labor for his cause. Because what happens is that when Jesus comes close to us and we come close to Jesus, is that we begin to realize that what was important to us has become important to him. And the more we begin to love him and develop a relationship with Jesus, the more that the things of Jesus and the things of God become important to us. The opposite becomes true. They become important to us. And that's why we see changes in people when they begin to read God's word, when they begin to pray, and when they begin to develop a relationship with Jesus. Because their character begins to be molded, begins to be changed, because they begin to recognize God's love for them, and they begin to change, maybe slowly at first, but change for the better. Jesus wants you to come close to him. He wants you to be focused on him, because when we are focused on Jesus, there's not a whole lot of room to be focused on ourselves, and then there's not a whole lot of room to be focused on what other people are doing as well. In fact, the closer we get to the throne of God, the more we realize that our character is dirty, it's impure, there's some scum on our character as well. And the more we realize how beautiful character of Jesus is, the closer we get to him. And so there's less focus on others, there's less focus on ourselves, and there's more focus on Jesus. And so Jesus says, come to me. Come to me, all who labor, heavy burden. You have a heavy burden on your shoulders this morning. He says, come to me. It doesn't even say come to the church. It doesn't say come to the pastor. He doesn't say come to the elders. What he says is come to me. So Jesus' appeal 2,000 years ago is the same appeal I want to address to you. Are you heavy burdened? Are you working hard and stumbling? Come to Jesus. Come to Jesus and he will give you rest that you may be re-strengthened. But you may also be able to continue going forward, taking on his yoke. But in order to take his yoke upon you, you have to recognize your weakness and say, Jesus, I can't keep going on. You have to be vulnerable to Jesus and say, Jesus, help me out. Come with me. Let's go and march forward and take this burden together. Because Jesus has been where you've been. Jesus has been where you are. Jesus has been where you're gonna go. And Jesus knows just how terrible it can be to overcome the burdens in your life. And so Jesus says, come to me. Let's pray. Father in heaven, I do not know the burdens on each one of our hearts. But I do know that it has become difficult to do it alone, to carry these burdens on our shoulders. And so, Father, you have promised, you have said, come to me, all who labor and who are working hard, who are struggling. You have said, come to me, and I will give you rest. But after the rest, there's going to be a time that we can work together. And so, Father, it is the desire of my heart to come into your presence. And I pray, and I know there are people here who desire of their heart to come into your presence as well. May we be as King David, who says, this is my desire, my greatest desire, to dwell, to be, and behold the presence of the Lord in his temple and in his house. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.